Hi, I'm Cindy, and this is the Community Effect Podcast. On this show, we talk about all things teaching and learning, from building authentic relationships to creating a classroom culture where students thrive. We dig into mindset, motivation, engagement, and behavior, because real classroom success isn't just about lesson plans. It's about the community you build. These are conversations for teachers who want more than to just survive. And these are strategies for educators who are ready to take their community to the next level. This is the Community Effect Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Community Effect Podcast. I'm Cindy, and I'm so excited that you're here. Because if you've ever caught yourself jumping into rescuing a struggling student, then this episode is for you. So let me set the scene. I was in a 5th grade classroom this past week, and I witnessed something that was absolutely amazing. This teacher, this absolute rock star, was guiding a student through a math problem. But here's the kicker. She never once told him the answer. Not even close. She asked questions, and then more questions, and even more questions, and even more questions, until the student was able to discover how to progress with his learning on his own. And I just stood there thinking, oh my gosh, how powerful that was. And I started to reflect on how fast I jumped into conversations with kids and gave them answers. You know, it had me thinking about this because she was so skilled at being patient and taking those questions and just continuing to narrow them down to bring him to a place where he could actually grasp onto the concept. It was just amazing to watch. And I know we've all seen it. You know, the student that raises their hand for help even before they attempted the problem. Or maybe it's the one who sighs, I don't know, the second they hit a challenge. And it's frustrating, right? But here's the thing. Students aren't just born helpless in their learning. That is a mindset that is developed over time and often. And I hate to say this, but as teachers, we play a part in it. And it happens when us good-hearted, well-meaning teachers do too much of the cognitive heavy lifting. And I know that sounds harsh, right? I'm not trying to put blame anywhere. And I'm sure, it felt like a dagger to the heart because we all want to support our kids. That's our motivation, right? But hear me out for a minute. Right now, more and more teachers are noticing a rise in students who shut down at the first sign of difficulty. Students who appear to refuse to even try or, ask for help before they ever read the question. And I know that sounds familiar. And far too often, we swoop in with solutions or we just show them how. And we think that we're helping. But in reality, we are unintentionally encouraging learned helplessness. And let me tell you, Fred Jones, who is one of my favorite educational behavior management guys, he nailed it when he said that when teachers do too much of the thinking, students learn that they don't have to. And that's the problem. And it's not necessarily a student problem. It's more of a teaching shift that we need to make. If we want independent learners, we have to stop rescuing students too soon. And every time we give answers too quickly, we're robbing our students of the chance to think for themselves. And listen, I get it. It's hard. Like I said, I think I would have jumped in a little bit sooner. And I know it goes against every fiber in our being and our best teacher instincts as educators because we want to help. But if we can just resist that urge and instead ask guiding questions, we're giving students something far more valuable than the answer. We're giving them ownership to their learning. And Jane Vella says it really well in her book, Learning to Listen, Learning to Teach. I'll summarize kind of her thoughts there is she says that anytime an adult feels it's necessary to intervene in an educational transaction, they should take a deep breath and ask themselves, is there some way that I can do less and grant more authority, responsibility, or agency to the learner? And I think that's a really powerful thing to say. So today we're diving into how questioning can shift your students from learned helplessness to confident, self-reliant learners. And I'll break down the why and the how and what you can do starting tomorrow to make questioning one of the most powerful tools you use in your classroom. Plus, I've got a free gift for you. It's a guide called Empowering Teachers Through Strategic Questioning. And you can grab that from the link in the show notes today, or you can go to social and comment on my latest Instagram post. But more on that later. Let's get back to that fifth grade teacher. So the moment I saw her in action, I just knew I had to talk about this because it was so powerful and so beautiful to watch. And it's truly something that we can all do. We just have to become more consciously aware of it. Because I know that as I was reflecting, when I go back, I don't know if I took that breath and asked myself if I was helping too much. And so I think it's a really great thing to try to develop, right? These questioning strategies that really pull them out of this learned helplessness place and empower them to think for themselves. So here's what happened in that classroom. The student was working through a math problem with the area model, and he was stuck, like deer in headlights stuck. And the teacher noticed that he was just kind of sitting there hanging out. And so she walked over and she asked him how he was doing. And the first thing I noticed was that she didn't ask him, are you stuck? Do you need help? She didn't make any assumptions. She just, let him tell her how he was feeling. And he told her that he was having a hard time getting started. He didn't really understand. And the teacher, she was completely unfazed by this. She didn't sigh. She didn't say, here, let me show you. Or, I taught this last week, right? None of those comments came out. She just kind of had perfect composure. And then she asked, well, how do you set up this problem using the area model? And he hesitated. And so she followed up with, what numbers do you have? And he answered 17. She said, well, how do you get 17? What two numbers make up 17? And he was like 1 and 7. She smiled. She said, okay, so how many place values are in the number 17? And at this point, he was still really unsure. And so she did something genius. She got him up and redirected him over to the word wall. And she had him read the definition of place value out loud. And then she walked him back to his seat. And she continued with her support by saying, 350 has 3 place values. How many place values does the number 17 have? And it did take a little more prompting than I'm going to share with you today. But finally, he got to the point where he said 2. So we were making progress. And then she asked, well, what is the place value of the 1 in the number 17? And he was able to respond 10. And so she asked, what about the 7? And he said the 1s. And at that moment, that light bulb went off. I mean, boom, he had something to work with. Slowly but surely, she guided him, not with answers or not by doing for him, but with questions that made him think. And that's the thing. It would have been so much easier to just tell him, so much faster too. But she didn't, because she knew something that many of us forget in the rush of our day. And that is, if we do all the thinking, our students won't. So the less we do for them, the more that they will learn to do for themselves. And that is how we build resilient, self-reliant learners who are ready to take on the world. Now, I want to zoom out for a second, because what this teacher did wasn't just great questioning, right? It wasn't just a great questioning strategy. It was a masterclass in creating a strong, sustainable classroom community. In my ACT formula, we talk about the 4 pillars that make classrooms thrive, which are authentic relationships, climate, culture, and then teacher mindset and collaboration. And what I saw in that classroom hit 2 of those pillars dead on. The first one was culture. This teacher was building a culture of ownership and growth mindset. She was saying, I believe in you. I know you can figure this out. And that belief That's what helps students step up and take responsibility for their own learning. And while she didn't physically say those words, she demonstrated that with her actions. And then the second one was teacher mindset. This teacher was practicing one of the most powerful mindsets we can have, and that is reflecting on her purpose. She recognized that her job was not to give answers. Her job is to create thinkers. And that shift changes everything. And this is why questioning is not just a teaching strategy, it is a community building strategy. When students know that they are expected to think, and when they feel secure enough to struggle, they develop the resilience that they need to succeed, not just in school, but in life. So let's break this down on how we can actually do this in our classrooms. And like I said, the last thing I was talking about was belief. Like the first thing we need to do is truly believe. We need to believe that the student has the tools that they need to be successful. We need to trust that the work that we've done as teachers in providing them with the lessons and the instruction and the modeling, that we will be able to retrieve that, right? That we're going to be able to work with that with them with the right questions. And that fifth grade teacher, she trusted him to do the work. At no point did she assume that he couldn't figure it out. She assumed that he could. He just needed the right questions. The second thing we need to do is use guiding questions instead of explanations. So instead of jumping in with a solution, you can ask questions like, well, what did you already know about this? Or what's another way to approach this problem? And lastly, where can you find more information to help? And that takes me to number 3, encourage students to use the resources. And we all want our students to utilize the notes, the anchor charts, and the quick reference guides that we provide them, but that's not always the case. In fact, most students don't even think of them. So what we need to do is be sure that we are using those resources with our students by having them continually reference them during lessons, during group work, during independent time, so they become really close to that resource. They know where to find it, they know how to use it, and it becomes an accessible tool that they can use independently. And that teacher, she gave just enough support, but not too much. She started broad with her questions and only narrowed when necessary. And when the student wasn't sure about place value, she didn't just tell him, she sent him to a resource that he had access to, and she scaffolded his learning. So there are a lot of other resources other than the physical resources that are out there, like students. Having another student talk with a student in class about the problem, that helps as well. That's a resource that they can utilize. But that's actually for another episode because that takes some strategic planning, and we really need to teach our kids or our students how to coach and not tell as well, because we don't want our students just giving answers. So, but they potentially can be another really great resource that you can use. And I did see that happening in her classroom quite frequently, which was really cool to see. And the truth is that this level of intentional questioning takes time and practice to develop. It takes a lot of modeling and working with students. But once you start to use it, it will change the way your students engage with their learning. And it's not just for math, it applies to every subject that's out there. The fourth thing we need to do is normalize struggle. Our students need to understand that it's okay to sit there in that protective struggle, that uncomfortable place, right? We want them in a place where they're challenged, but they're not completely overwhelmed. If they become completely overwhelmed, then yes, we need to come in and we need to support, a little more intentionally, and maybe even by providing some examples. But ideally, we hope to hold off on that as long as we possibly can until we see that the student is no longer in that challenge area and they've moved to this like frustration level. So letting them know that it's okay to be there is really important. Telling students that struggling means that their brain is growing, that it's going to feel a little uneasy at first when we're starting to learn new things, but that's the process that we go through as we're acquiring new information. And so it's really important to let them know that it's okay. And then the fifth thing is to challenge yourself, to wait before giving answers. And just see what happens when you let students sit in that productive struggle for a little bit longer. That 5th grade teacher, she let him sit in productive struggle for the right amount of time. And he was in that magic zone where he was challenged but not overwhelmed. And that's where his learning came from. So what questions do we ask? And like I said earlier, we need to ask these guiding questions that are open-ended, right? Because intentional open-ended questioning transforms the way students think and learn. So when we're moving away from simply giving answers and we're guiding them instead with questions, we're guiding students towards self-discovery. They start to uncover solutions on their own, and it makes their learning process more meaningful and more memorable. And as students explain their thinking and they start to defend their reasoning and justify their answers, they are also developing essential communication skills. They're learning how to articulate their thoughts and their feelings with confidence. Beyond that, questioning serves as a powerful diagnostic tool. It helps us pinpoint the gaps in the student's understanding so that we can provide the right level of support without taking over the learning. And I think that's something that she did very strategically. She was able to assess real quickly how far back she needed to go because she understood where his gap in learning was, or his gap in understanding, I should say, was. And so she was able to do that. The right questions also encourage active learning by turning classrooms into dynamic spaces where students engage, explore, and make connections. And more importantly, thought-provoking questions, they push students to analyze, evaluate, and synthesize information, which strengthens their critical thinking and the problem-solving skills. So over time, students begin to reflect on their own learning. They start to ask themselves those questions. What do I already know? What strategies can I use? And essentially, they're learning how to learn, and we're teaching them through our questioning. When questioning is embedded in classroom culture, it creates an environment where struggle is seen as a natural and necessary part of learning. So students become less afraid of making mistakes and more collaborative and more persistent in their efforts. And because well-structured questions scaffold the learning, they provide just enough challenge without overwhelming students, building their confidence that they need to keep going even when things get tough. All right. So I hope you can see how the power of questioning really helps students build that learning muscle, right? It helps them identify how they can help themselves. And now that you've got some actionable strategies and some ideas, I want you to take it just one step further and grab that free resource. It's got a lot more examples. It has a teacher cheat sheet in it that will help you with questioning. But it's called Empowering Students Through Strategic Questioning. And you can just click the link in the show notes, or you can comment on my latest IG post and I'll send it your way. And remember, the goal isn't just to get students to the right answer. That's not the goal. It's to help them become the kind of thinkers who can find their own way there. Because real learning happens when students do the thinking. And real confidence grows when they discover, oh, wait, I can figure this out. And that teacher in 5th grade, in that classroom, she gave her student the gift of confidence. And you, my friends, can do the same thing too. Let's commit to asking more and telling less. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend. And if you're loving the Community Effect podcast, please make sure to hit that subscribe/follow button so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep building those strong, sustainable classroom communities and give questioning a try. You got this, and I got your back. Have a great day.